Welcome back to the Producer Podcast. I'm your host, Micah Versemann, and today we're looking at one of the most important places on set, the crafty table, as I'm joined by Kayla Bouren to talk about her film journey and what producers should know about feeding the crew between meal times. So let's pull back the wrapper and dig in. So thank you, Kayla, for coming on to the Producer Podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're talking about Crafty today, which I don't think I've ever been to a film festival or networking event where it's like people are there like wanting to be the people working Crafty, but yet if you talk to anybody on the crew, that's like the most important position that they would say exist on a film set is having good people behind Crafty. So yeah, to start, just like introduce yourself and like how you got into the film industry and kind of landed, working multiple projects in the crafty realm.
Yeah, so my name's Kayla Bouren, and I am 23. I've been doing Crafty for, ever since I graduated high school, I've been doing film stuff. But I got involved with film through my younger brother, who is a cinematographer, and it ended up being kind of a family affair, which is really fun. It's not often you get to work together with your family in your career. So that's been really cool. Just with all the positions on a film set, it's given that opportunity. So I've done food service stuff and catering type things for many years. I've helped out since probably I was 9 or 10 with events at my church. So it just seemed like a really easy fit since I don't have any of that like technical knowledge that you usually expect in the film realm. So it's just a really fun way that I can be involved with what other members of my family are doing while utilizing the skills that God has given me. Yeah, so that's kind of how it got involved, just through my family and word of mouth from different people in the film industry.
Nice. Um, and so since you had been doing like food catering and stuff like that prior to getting involved in the film industry, like what were maybe a couple key things that you already knew from that you were able to easily kind of use as you went into the film industry?
Yeah, I'd say some key things that translate well from just general food service to crafty is just good people skills and understanding like just how to best serve the people around you and meet their needs. Um, just being organized and uh, yeah, just having a heart of service towards the people around you, basically.
Share a little bit about like crafty and catering. What are the differences between those two departments and what they do? Because especially in the independent world, so often it does just kind of all get lumped together under one position.
Yeah, no, so crafty and catering are usually distinctive. They can be run by the same person, but catering is in charge of the main meals on set, whether that's breakfast, first meal, second meal. Uh, and then crafty is in charge of hydrating, caffeinating, and fueling the crew between the meals on set. So they're providing all of those extras to keep people happy for their next meal or to make up for a poor meal.
I feel like that needs to be a film t-shirt. Hydrating, caffeinating, and fueling. And then it says like crafty on the back or something like
Yeah,
that. That would be fun.
that would be fun. I'll have to do that.
So I guess maybe in the pre-production process, like as a producer, what factors should I kind of be looking at to like figure out, okay, like how many people maybe need to be on the crafty team?
Yeah, so I think one of the main considerations as a producer would be first your crew size and the length of the project. Because I've worked crafty for a good number of films of various sizes. I've done it solo before. I've also been on a team with like two or three other people. Um, and I've also done catering and crafty together. So I think if it's probably 50 people or less, you can combine catering and craft services under the same departments and have like 2 or 3 people handling it. But once you get over 50 people and a longer length of time, uh, or you just have a larger budget, more professional, project you're working on, then you just kind of scale that up as you go. But it's definitely manageable for like 1 or 2 people. But I guess also you'd have to look at what sort of locations you're dealing with and travel times. That can be a factor as well. If you need somebody on set at all times, but you can't prep on set, let's say coffee, then you need someone who can go back and forth and transport, whether that's a dedicated person on your craft services team or a PA who can make runs for the crafty person.
Like you mentioned, the one project you were both catering and crafty. That definitely seems to be a common thing in the independent industry on like the low budget um projects and that. And but I'd be curious, like if he's thinking about combining those two, like are there some factors of like, well, make sure you weigh these because these might tell you, is it feasible for the same person to do both?
Yeah. So I will say, yeah, the bigger the project, it's usually a better idea to have them split. But uh, probably my favorite project I worked on was a feature film with a large budget, but they only had about 25 people on the crew. So I did catering and craft services for that. We had a bit of transportation time, but it was manageable because the group was small. It kind of felt like a family. So people were willing to help out with things, even though it was a more, professional, larger budget thing. So I could set up Crafty in the morning and make sure all the coffee was there and then have, come back and check things at meal times, even though I wasn't there the whole day. That worked out well. I guess one consideration would be locations. If you're going to have a lot of location changes, it could be helpful to not have your craft services and catering combined,
Mm-hmm.
just to give that flex room for all those changes and moving parts, so you're not putting all that stress on one person
Mm-hmm.
and they're not having to transport so many things. But if you have one location and you're going to be there for a good amount of time, it could be feasible. Also, I guess talking to whoever you are thinking of hiring and seeing how they feel about that, if they've done that before, if they're confident in their abilities of doing one or both of those jobs, and how they feel about managing it would be helpful.
Still kind of like in that pre-production time or what, when should I be like bringing you or your team on to start figuring things out in terms of like food allergies or what your kind of like plan is of like what things you want to have stocked and all that so you can be ready to go.
Yeah, ideally, I like to be brought onto the project at least a month out because when I can, I try to send out a email survey to all the cast and crew, getting food preferences and allergies and maybe favorite snacks, so that I can come up with a good plan of what things I want to purchase. Because there's no point in purchasing a bunch of snacks that I think sound good if everyone's allergic to them or nobody likes them. So that's always fun, just to see what things people like. Sometimes I give some ideas on that list of things I normally have, just to jog people's memories, like, oh yeah, that snack exists. But yeah, usually about a month out is helpful when time allows.
I guess this is a random question I just thought of. But like, people visit Crafty and depending on the location and that, it might be outside. So like it might involve like tables and tents and, you know, power cords to have like coffee pots going and that. Like, is that a bunch of stuff that like you as Crafty are having to like go pick up and, take out of your budget? Or is that stuff maybe you're pulling from like the locations truck?
Yeah, so usually on larger films, it can be from locations, and I try to be in communication with them before the shoot or as soon as I know, like, okay, who's in charge of tables, who's in charge of power cords, where can I plug things in? Don't want to plug into some electric thing and blow up a light or something.
Hmm.
Yeah, so figuring out who does that. I've also brought all of those supplies myself before. I've tried to put together like a crafty kit sort of thing where I have coolers and extension cords and coffee pots and tables, chairs, and just collect those things. So depending on where the film is taking place, and if I have the ability to transport those things, I let production know that I have supplies that are available, either to loan them or whatever the situation is. But I've also borrowed all those things from locations and had their assistance with that.
Kind of tying off of that and like where you're getting your stuff from, but my as a producer, my favorite thing is budgeting. So like how do I figure out like what to budget for Crafty especially? Because that's I find usually a little harder than even like meals because with catering it seems like there's a pretty straightforward formulas of like what to budget per plate or, per person or whatever, but Crafty's a lot different.
I don't have like a set formula, sadly. um, I usually throw it out to the producers to find out kind of what they're already thinking and
Mhm.
then look at the number of people that we have. That's where, if I'm ever doing catering and crafty at the same time, if they have a budget for both, that allows me to draw upon either one if I'm lacking in one or the other, and share supplies between them, which can be helpful. Like for coffee, you can have a coffee with breakfast and transport it to crafty if you have leftovers.
Hmm.
Um, but it depends on how robust you want your crafty to be, can help determine that. Do you want a massive crafty that's as big as your catering meals, or do you want just something small and basic on the side?
Since you mentioned kind of like, talking to the producers and seeing what they were thinking, like I'm curious, have you ever like run into problems or issues or like sometimes I call them misconceptions, I guess is probably the best word of like the independent producers, well, they think it crafty in this way, but like you as somebody who's worked is like, yeah, that actually doesn't really work that way, or it's not going to work the way you think. We need to do it this way instead.
Yes, I've thankfully not run into that too often, but I try to ask a lot of good questions before so that we can, clear up those kinds of things, make sure
Mhm.
everyone's on the same page with expectations. Like uh, one that we've had before is who's providing coffee in the mornings. We've had catering provide coffee, but then people didn't like the coffee at catering, so they're like, "Well, where's Crafty's coffee?" Like, "Oh, I didn't know you wanted it ready already." So just kind of working through that. Like, okay, so is this something you want me to make sure to have ready at this time? And just kind of talking through some of those things, or special requests from people who will go to the producers and say, "Hey, Crafty doesn't have this. Can we have that?" And then they'll come back. And sometimes it's expensive specialty things. Like, okay, is this something that Crafty should be providing, or is this something that you need to go purchase yourself? And then working through that with the producers. In some cases, like, okay, actually, we do have the budget to provide this, so go ahead. Or like, no, we'll let them purchase that themselves.
And I think you were starting to kind of touch on it there with what you were talking about, but like kind of on the flip side of like misconceptions maybe producers have when working with Crafty, like what are things producers can do to best assist the Crafty team so that they can do their job to the best of their ability?
Yeah, I think it can be helpful, in pre-production for the crafty and a producer to sit down and for the producer to kind of lay out here's what I envision crafty looking like, because that since I've seen it done quite a few different ways and then have
Mhm.
ways that I prefer to do it, I can see how all of that fits in to know if it's within the scope of what I'm comfortable doing, or if I have some recommendations like, well, I prefer to do it this way. It can work the way you're doing it. And then just kind of get some of those things out of the way up front so you're not running into problems later. Um, that way, if Crafty is not meeting the producer's expectations, we can see if it was something that we've already discussed or maybe something that came up along the way. Like, oh, I assumed you would have known that. My bad. Let's talk about it now and see. if we can clear that issue.
Mhm. One of the other kind of common things I've seen uh in kind of more the independent world is like you almost get to kind of like a very low tier of feature films where it's like the producer's like, I'll just run Crafty myself because it's cheaper than hiring another person that I have to lodge and feed, and all of this. And sometimes that works out. And then I've been on a few sets where like that didn't really work out too well. But I guess like for the producers out there that are going to give that a try on their next project, like what would be some pieces of advice that you would give to them about running Crafty?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, like you're saying, it can work out sometimes if a producer was like, I think I'll just run Crafty. Again, it goes to expectations, like what sort of production you have, what that producer's capacity is, if they feel like they can actually run that. If they've run Crafty before, maybe it'll work out great. Um, but yeah, I think depending on what sort of setup they're thinking of, that might be something to then discuss with your crew so that they have expectations, knowing like, okay, the producer's running Crafty. um, yeah, but it could work if you wanted it to. But having somebody who is there and dedicated to looking out for the crew and making sure they're properly fueled and have all the things they need is usually a better idea.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I would definitely agree on that one. You were talking about sometimes having to kind of discern like, hey, is this special request, something that like Crafty can afford to do, or is it something that like the crew member just needs to do? I've talked to a number of producers and stuff who like all admit that like there's a lot of waste that happens in the film industry. And most of the time, I would say it's not the crafty department's fault, but I feel like there's so much of that that does come from there, either because you have those people that special request something, and then they're like the only person that is eating that thing or drinking that thing that did cost quite a bit of money or whatever, or like I've seen friends posting stuff where it's like their crafty truck is literally serving like a full meal in between meals, and I sit here as a producer like, do we really need, like, yes, I want to treat my crew well, but like, do you really need that many meals in a day? So like, how do you kind of discern that so that people are still feeling taken care of, but we're also not like causing a bunch of waste and you get to the end of the shoot and it's like, well, here's all this leftover crafty that we can't return because it's all been opened or, kind of divided up and we just have to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a thing. Uh, and I think there's multiple ways you can handle that because I also do not like waste, and just personally. And then obviously on the producer side, that's not a good way of managing your money. So, uh, on the one hand, if your crafting and catering is combined, that allows the one person or small group of people to be in charge of all of the food. That can allow them to make sure everything is well balanced between crafting and catering to try to minimize waste. Again, being able to share both budgets and supplies that can help minimize waste. And with between like two or three people on a 50 person or less film, that is very feasible. Unless there's some extenuating circumstances that make it not. But generally,
Mhm.
it's pretty feasible. I also try as crafty or even catering, but try not to open package packages of things until I know I actually need them. That way, if you are able to return something that you don't use at the end, you've made provision for that and not opened a bunch of things unnecessarily and have a bunch of things you have to get rid of now. So that's always helpful. Or in cases that I have opened something, I either distribute it to anyone who needs it, or I take it if I'm going straight to another film. well, I can just use it for the next one. That doesn't help on the producer side for that project, but helps me. um,
Oh.
yeah, waste is not my favorite. So yeah, that's one way to do it. Also, if you don't have crafty and catering combined, um, I love as crafty when I'm able to be in contact with catering uh, to kind of know what they're planning. That way, you don't end up with a giant buffet between meals. Especially if you have a really good catering team that's working really hard and providing really good quality stuff, then if crafty is like trying to one up catering, the crew might like that, but it's really unnecessary, and we can manage it where everyone is still just as happy without like a bunch of excessive waste and
Mm.
purchasing and all that stuff. So
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way of like the appearance of like catering and crafty kind of seeing who can be the better food provider, but it makes sense.
it can be helpful though if you end up with a really bad catering situation where
Hmm.
crafty can come and fill in the gap for that. Like, okay, we're going to provide some sandwiches and some extra things to make up for that. Like if you're in a tight spot, which I've been in before, where they'd already hired on catering and they could not fire them for whatever reason or could not find a replacement. Like, oh, this is not going to work out good. So Crafty was able to come in and fill in that gap to uh, keep everyone happy.
So then, these are just a couple of fun questions, but in your experience with Crafty, like, what are some of the most popular items that you've had to buy?
When I can find it, dried mango. Literally, like the most popular item of all time is dried mango, probably followed by beef jerky, good solid protein option.
Hmm.
And then if we've got a candy crowd, Sour Patch Kids, and then always a chocolate thing is in the top, and then probably crackers of some sort, something crunchy when you are in a munchy mood but don't really need something.
Hmm. What's your favorite item? Like, obviously, you kind of you're always providing the Crafty, so that makes it easy. But like, if you weren't providing Crafty on a set, like, what would be the item you would want to see at the
Ooh,
table?
see, I'm actually not a very snacky person, which is really funny. Like I've had so many people come up to me at Crafty like, "Oh, you must just eat snacks all day." Like, no, actually, I've eaten two snacks in the past 3 weeks. uh, no, it's but I love dried mango, so I guess I fall in the popular crowd. No, uh, but if I had to pick something that I've never seen at Crafty that I would put would be dried seaweed. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
I don't think I would try that one personally, but yeah. No, I'm the opposite. I'm like not a snacky person normally, and then I get onto a film set and it's like a switch is flipped and like I'm snacking all the time. It's probably kind of bad. Especially
Well,
if there's Sour Patch Kids.
well, I mean, it's the concept of you're not having to spend your own money on it. You get on set and it's all free. uh,
Yeah, I guess that's true. I never thought about it that way.
like unlimited snacks. Yay!
Hmm.
Well,
How about kind of one more question on like the favorite snacks and that, but like the the flavored or sparkling water. That's something like
ooh.
it changes constantly, it seems. So like have you found like, oh, this is like overall like the favorite of filmmakers or have a go-to one to get?
Not really. It really depends on which group I'm with. Sometimes I'll start off purchasing even a particular brand, and then I'll hear people talking, and they're like, "Oh, I love this one," and then all of a sudden you find out that everyone loves a different one. Like, okay, well, once we run out of this package, I'll try the other one. Um,
Mhm.
I Yeah, so I've tried a good variety. LaCroix is pretty classic, but I have been on a couple films where no one wanted LaCroix. They all wanted like bubbly or something else. So I'll mix it up depending on the crowd.
I have a few kind of like wrap up questions that are a little bit more film in general as opposed to crafty specific. But first I thought like I kind of throw it out because I've never worked crafty. So like I don't know if there was anything in kind of your notes or anything like
Yeah,
that we should touch on.
we could go over extras, like,
Yeah.
because that's its own whole thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
No.
when it comes to background extras, I've worked crafty where you're providing snacks for your background extras, like as crafty. I've also had a separate person and a separate budget completely where they're like, there's a lot of extras for this shoot. So we have a separate person handling all of the extras crafty. So we've done that. I've also been to some films where extras were not allowed to have crafty other than water. And they were held in a separate holding room. And it actually worked out fine because they were all emailed beforehand, like, you will not be provided any snacks. Please bring your own. We'll have some bottled water, but also bring your own because once we're out, we're out. And then they were all held separately. So because they were so far away from Crafty, they probably didn't even know it existed. So so that worked out fine. But I have also worked where they had separate extras Crafty, but they were in line of sight of the crew Crafty. And so I had so many people coming up to me like, "Oh, can I try this? Can I have that?" Oh, so that made it a little challenging. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think if you're going to be consistently having more than 20 extras for an extended period of time, uh, like it could be a good idea to give them a separate area for their own crafty. Um, Otherwise, again, just discussing that up front. So the craft services lead knows like, oh, we're going to have 60 extras on this day, so make sure it's twice the number of the crew. uh, Make sure what's going on and where that's all going to be taking place. But that's always a fun one.
And I can relate. It's important to plan out because I was on one set and it wasn't really thought of, and so they put the extras holding where the crafty was. And by the time we broke for lunch, the extras had literally devoured, like there was no crafty left, and it was like a very small crew, so there wasn't anybody free that could like run out to restock
Oh
crafty for the
no.
rest of the day. So like the crew was not too happy uh the rest of the day when there wasn't anything left for them. So yeah, definitely something to talk about. Um
Yep, it's something you don't necessarily think of until you know tragedy strikes.
mhm.
uh,
Are there any differences then with Crafty when it's like dealing with kind of like your lead talent and actors and that type of thing, or do they normally just get the same Crafty as the crew?
yeah, every film I've worked on, they've just had the same crafty as the crew. Um, I've also worked as a cast liaison uh, on a film. So in that case, I was like the dedicated PA to go and get snacks from Crafty for the talent, so they didn't have to uh, like. Usually, it was far away from their holding area, so I
Hmm.
could go and get coffee for them, other things. Sometimes as Crafty, I've put together little baskets for actors' rooms so that they can have like little welcome baskets with some snacks. Especially if I sent out a survey and they were able to respond, then I could put some of their favorite things in a little basket for them that maybe aren't something that I could keep stocked at Crafty. Um,
Hmm.
and I guess on that note, I have done that before with special requests. If like I once had someone request kombucha, which I would love to just have kombucha on tap on film. That would be great. But sadly, kombucha is kind of expensive, so I'm not able to
Hmm.
do that normally. So I sometimes am able to just put together a couple things if someone has requested it, or even in a survey said like, "Oh, my favorite drink is kombucha." Then I'll get them like just a little welcome to set and set it aside just for that specific person. Uh,
Hmm.
or like the first AD had a very particular favorite candy. Like, okay, I'll get them a package of that. And be like, hey, welcome to set. Here you go. Um, since I won't be able to keep this in stock for everybody all the time. Uh,
Yeah.
I could kind of balance it that way.
Is obviously you most people want, the quick like grab and go type stuff. But I also have been on set where, especially when it's features and you're there for X amount of weeks, people get to the point where it's like, I can't take any more of like the pre-packaged stuff. I need like something healthier or fresher. So like what are maybe a few of your kind of like go-to things to provide that are a little healthier or fresher?
Yeah, I love having fresh cut veggies and dips, whether it's like ranch or hummus. That's always popular when I can do that. Fresh fruit. And I usually have like bananas and apples and those kind of things all the time, but sometimes getting like a big fruit tray or making one is cool. Fun things like that, or putting together a sandwich tray. Uh, Hard boiled eggs, those are popular. Uh, Homemade baked goods, that's always fun.
I bet. Yeah. I never would
So
have thought about hard-boiled eggs, that's for sure.
yeah,
That's
if you do hard boiled eggs, you have to make sure there's salt there too, or else it's just sad. Like no salt for my eggs, no.
So then starting to kind of wrap things up here with these couple of few closing questions. The first one would be, and again, this can be general. It doesn't have to be crafty specific. It could be related to anything even you've just kind of observed on set and that. But like, what would be one piece of advice you would give to producers out there about running a good set?
Ooh, I think communication, just good communication with your team, and then positive feedback when you see things going well. Uh, it's easy to remember to point out when there's an issue happening that needs to be solved. But if you have someone who's just always doing a really good job, uh, you might come to the end of the shoot and realize that you never really gave them any feedback. So, I mean, they could assume they were doing well, but they could also be unsure of how they were doing on set. So, I think good feedback and positive comments when someone's just doing really well, and then yeah, just good communication to keep things running smoothly.
And then kind of on the flip side, because especially, working crafty, that's a position you can only do when you're gone, on projects and stuff. So like when you're not on set, what advice would you have to filmmakers about like building community?
Yeah, making sure you're plugged into a good church, even if you're not there very often because of traveling, but having that good home base so that when you are in one location, you can have that solid foundation and people who can come around you. Um, yeah, really plugging into just a good church is my main advice. Because as a former military kid and someone who travels for film, I don't stay in one place very often. So just yeah, really plugging into good church community has been so helpful for me, uh, just to stay grounded in my faith and in community.
This last question, you can take this kind of any direction you want, in terms, but so the question is, how do you lead a healthy lifestyle while working in the film
Mm,
industry? And I'll let you kind of run with whatever direction you want to take the, t- the umbrella of healthy. Um,
yeah, that's a great question. Say leading a healthy lifestyle on set, in the first sense, spiritually healthy, taking time for the Lord, whether that's if you have a commute to set, listening to your audio Bible, or taking a scripture passage that you can work on memorizing throughout that shoot. Um, just seeing how much time you have and managing that well. Because staying plugged into God's word and our relationship with Him is first and foremost the best way to stay healthy. And that will fuel your attitude and your performance in your job and how you'll interact with all the people around you. Uh, and then, as crafty, being nutritionally healthy, just um, figuring out how that works best for you for meals and snacks, and trying to balance, you know, fun, unhealthy snacks and healthy things, especially if you are just going back to back films. I know that can be a big issue for a lot of people. Like, and so if that means talking with your crafty person on your team, like, hey, would it be possible to provide some of these healthier options that, aren't super expensive health foods, but just simple things like fresh fruit and veggies and that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, that can be one way to be nutritionally healthy, especially going back to back on sets. And then just keeping a positive attitude. I think that's a great way to stay healthy in general.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. Join us next week for an all new episode of the show as season 11 continues. Until then, make sure to subscribe to the Producer Podcast and pick up your copy of The Producer's Life book, available now. Until then, thanks for listening.